I remember the way the snow looked that evening, soft and heavy, settling over Bend like it wanted to quiet the whole town. I was 32 then, old enough to know better. Still young enough to hope that coming home for Christmas might not hurt them, the way it always did. Before I go any further, I want to ask you something. What are you doing while listening to my story right now? For me, when everything happened, I was driving through that dark Oregon road toward a house filled with lights and people who thought they knew exactly who I was. I pulled into my dad's driveway just as the wind picked up. The place looked like the cover of a winter magazine, every tree wrapped in white bulbs, every window glowing gold. My stomach tightened the way it always did when I came home. I wiped my palms on my dress. The simple black gown no one knew cost more than most used cars. I had put it on that night because I wanted to feel my mother near me. She had sketched the first version of it years ago, a design I later rebuilt from her dream. Inside, voices rose and fell like a chorus that had practiced too long. Laughter, clinking glasses, the rustle of expensive fabrics. I stepped through the door and felt the heat of the room against my cold skin. I saw faces turn, then eyes slide over me. Some smiled in that polite way people smile when they do not know what to do with you. My dad stood at the head of the dining table. He always chose the position where everyone had to look at him. When he spotted me, his expression changed in that small, sharp way I recognized from childhood. His gaze drifted down my dress and back up to my face. He did not need words. The room felt it before he spoke. He let the disappointment settle in the air as naturally as he breathed. He said I looked like I had shown up without trying, and that I should have known better at a gathering like this with guests present. There was a little laugh from someone near the fireplace. I felt my chest tighten, a quiet sting that reached all the way back to the girl I was at 17. Courtney appeared beside him, beautiful and polished in a shimmering silver gown. She had always known how to perform for a room. She gave me that look she used when she wanted others to join her side. She said it was brave of me to wear a dress that plain, that most people save simple pieces like that for office parties or quick errands. The people around her chuckled, not loud, enough to be heard. Michael leaned back in his chair and shook his head the way older brothers do when they think they understand everything. He reminded everyone that I had always dressed strangely. He said he was surprised I managed to find something that did not look like it, came from a thrift sale. More laughter, the kind that sounds like clinking glass against bone. I stood there, breathing slowly, steadying myself in the middle of the heat and perfume and judgment. I reminded myself that I was not the girl they remembered. I had built my life far away from this house, far away from their opinions. But the sting still landed. Old wounds remember their way home. I moved toward my seat. My heels clicked on the hardwood floor, and the sound felt too loud, like a reminder I did not belong. I pulled out a chair and eased myself down. For a moment, I watched them as if from a distance. Dad holding court. Courtney tossed her hair and leaned forward so everyone could smell whatever new fragrance she was promoting that month. Michael tapping his fork to get someone's attention. They all looked polished, confident, unaware of anything outside their perfect bubble. The dinner began in its usual rhythm. Plates passed around, compliments exchanged. Courtney described her gown in detail, naming a high-end designer she adored. She bragged about working on a campaign with a luxury brand everyone at the table seemed to admire. A brand they talked about like it was a dream they wanted to claim. I felt a flicker of something warm inside me. Something almost amused. They loved that brand. They had no idea I had built it from the bones of my own survival, that I had spent years working in silence while everyone assumed I had wasted my life. Dad raised his glass during a lull in the conversation. He thanked everyone for being there and said he was proud of how well his children had done. I felt his eyes sweep past me like a shadow. He added that some people still needed to find their place. The room absorbed his words in quiet agreement. I breathed in through my nose, the scent of cedar from the tree, roasted ham, cinnamon from the candles. Sounds blended together. Someone laughed too loud by the bar. A fork scraped against a plate. My heart beat in my chest, steady and slow. As they talked, I noticed Henry Cole, a guest of my brother's, study me with quiet curiosity. He asked me what I did for work these days. Before I could answer, Courtney brushed him off and said I bounced around between odd jobs. She called me unpredictable. She said I probably spent more on gas than on clothes. I felt her words like little needles. Sharp. Familiar. I took a sip of water and let the cool slide down my throat. I let the moment stretch. Inside my chest, something shifted. That old ache my family always triggered began to burn into something steadier and colder. The kind of cold that makes you clear instead of numb. I glanced at the table again, at the lights reflecting off crystal glasses, at the people who believed they knew my entire story without ever asking, at the sister who mocked me to hide her own insecurity, at the brother who clung to his image of superiority, at the father who could never see past his own expectations. Their voices blurred around me. I could hear my own heartbeat louder than the conversation. I recognized the feeling rising in me. It was the moment right before something changed. I leaned back slightly and let myself meet their laughter with nothing more than a steady breath. The room felt chilled, even in its warmth. I realized they truly did not know who I was anymore. Maybe they never had. The thought slid through me with an unexpected sense of peace. And just like that, without raising my voice or defending myself, I whispered to my own mind that this was the last time their opinions would land on my skin the way they used to. I touched the fabric of my dress under the table, remembering the hours of stitching, the careful planning, the artistry that came from both my hands and my mother's sketch. The dress they believed was cheap, the dress they mocked so casually. I looked at Courtney across the table. Her smile was bright and hollow. Beneath it, I saw a flicker of something uneasy. Maybe she sensed the shift in me. Maybe she felt something changing. The conversation picked back up. Laughter swelled again, and I sat there quietly, knowing something inside me had already begun to move in a direction none of them were prepared for. The night was far from over. The longer I sat at that table, the louder everything seemed, and the less sense any of it made to me. The clinking of forks, the little pops of laughter, the soft holiday music drifting in from the living room, it all wrapped together into this blur of sound that kept washing over me. Waves. Courtney had found her spotlight again. She always did. She tipped her head so her hair fell just right on her shoulder and started, telling the woman next to her about her latest brand deal. She said she had been in Los Angeles last month shooting content for a campaign, and she made sure every sentence included words like engagement and followers and exclusive. Then she shifted very smoothly into talking about the brand that had become her new obsession. A luxury label, she said, the kind of house that understood real women, the kind of designs that could turn anyone into a statement. She ran her hand along the silver fabric of her dress, told them how it was from a limited collection, how she could not believe she was working with a team that sophisticated. Ellington Atelier, she said, like she was tasting something sweet. Have you heard of it? I felt my stomach clench and then relax all at once. My fingers tightened on the napkin in my lap. Around the table, a few heads nodded. Someone said they had seen the brand mentioned in a magazine. Another guest said they had tried to get an appointment at the New York showroom and could not get in. Courtney laughed like this was all somehow about her. She said that was the energy she wanted for her personal image, that she was in talks with the brand, that they were looking at her for a partnership. She let the word partnership hang in the air like perfume. I listened to every word like I was listening to a stranger talk about my own life. I heard it, and at the same time it felt very distant. There was this strange mix of pride and irritation running through me. Pride because I had built something that people at this table were impressed by. Irritation because my sister had turned even that into a prop. Michael jumped in next. He cleared his throat in that way he used to when he wanted people to know he had something important to say. He said he might be working with Ellington Atelier too, from the business side. He said Henry, the man sitting near the end of the table, was with a premium spirits company, and they had been discussing a cross-promotional campaign with a major fashion house. Henry gave a small smile and nodded, confirming that yes, There had been some promising conversations. He said the founder of the brand had a strong vision. He mentioned the word integrity. Hearing that word in this house almost made me laugh. My dad seized the opening immediately. He lifted his glass just high enough to draw attention without actually committing to a real toast. He said that this was what he meant when he talked about ambition. He pointed, figuratively, at Courtney and Michael. He said you could tell which children understood how the world worked and which ones did not. My fork hovered over my plate. I felt the old familiar burn rise up behind my ribs. It did not knock the wind out of me the way it used to. It just sat there, hot and steady, like something I had learned to live with. One of my dad's colleagues glanced my way then, almost apologetic. He asked what I was doing these days, in that careful tone people use when they expect the answer will be awkward. I opened my mouth to say something simple. Before I could, my dad answered for me. He told the man I was still trying to figure things out. He said I had bounced around between little projects. He used the word little and let it land in the center of the table. He reminded them all that I had left college early and never really settled into a career. He called it a free spirit phase. The way he said it made it sound like an illness. I felt heat climb into my face, but I kept my expression still. My water glass felt cool under my fingers. I took a sip and let the lie pass through the air without fighting it. I knew there would be a time for the truth. I knew it did not have to be tonight, or at least not at this moment. Beside Courtney, a young woman I did not know very well, Madison, had her phone propped against a breadbasket. She thought she was being discreet. She was filming little clips of the table, snippets of Courtney talking, a quick sweep of the food, my dad making one of his practiced jokes. I caught my own face at the edge of the frame once, eyes down, mouth flat. Courtney whispered to her, just loud enough for me to hear, that her followers loved real family stuff. People eating, laughing, being themselves, that kind of thing. Then she added that it would be funny to show how different siblings could be. One glammed up and working, one in a plain dress looking like she came from a grocery run. They both snickered softly. Madison angled the camera in my direction for half a second longer than necessary. I looked straight into the lens for a heartbeat, then away. I wondered if she would post that clip. I wondered how many strangers would watch my image on a screen and think they knew the story. The conversation drifted. Someone mentioned a trip to Cabo. Someone else talked about a lake house renovation. The topics all sat in that comfortable middle ground of people who are doing well enough to pretend nothing can touch them. I let myself drift too, but in a different way. My mind slipped to the years that had led me here. Tiny studio apartments, late nights with nothing but a sewing machine and too much coffee. The nights I skipped dinner because I needed fabric more than food. The meetings where men twice my age had called me sweetheart and asked if there was a real decision maker they could talk to. I thought about all of that as my family complained about delayed shipping on some high-end online order. Henry spoke again, directing a question to my dad. He asked if it was true that one of his daughters had studied design. I felt every muscle in my back tense. Before I could move, Courtney jumped in. She told him I had gone through a phase when I was younger. I used to sketch dresses on notebook paper, that I had been good in a quirky kind of way, but that nothing ever came from it. She said sometimes people cling to little girl dreams longer than they should. The table laughed in that easy way people laugh when the person being discussed is not really present in their minds. My dad nodded like this version of my story was carved in stone. He looked at me then, quick, like he wanted to see if I would argue. I did not. I just held his gaze for a beat longer than usual, long enough for him to sense that something was different, even if he could not name it yet. The lights from the tree in the corner blinked in and out, green and red and gold. The reflection in the window showed a ghost version of the room. I could see myself in it. The simple black dress, the calm face, the eyes that did not match the story they kept telling about me. Under the table, my phone buzzed softly against my leg. I slipped my hand down and tilted it just enough to read the screen. Naomi. The message was short. The article is ready. Founder profile. New York outlet. We just need your yes on timing. My heart gave one heavy thud in my chest. For a second, the voices around me faded to a dull hum. I stared at the little rectangle of light in my hand. My thumb hovered over the screen. Around me, my family kept talking about Ellington Atelier like it was a distant star. Beautiful, untouchable, powerful. None of them looked at me as they spoke. I locked the phone and laid it face down in my lap. I could still feel its presence, like a heartbeat against my skin. The truth was sitting there, quiet, waiting. Not just about who I was, but about who they had been to me all these years. I folded my napkin over my knee again, smoothed the fabric of my dress, and let the conversation wash over me one more time. The timing would matter. How and when they learned the truth would matter. I just had not decided yet if it would happen before this night ended, or after. I slipped away from the table when no one was paying attention, carrying my water glass with me like it might make my exit look less obvious. The hallway was dimmer than the dining room, quieter too, and for a moment I just stood there, letting the noise fade behind me. My mom's old bedroom was at the end of that hall, the same room that had held her things long after she was gone. I had not stepped inside it in years. Maybe I was looking for a place where the air did not feel so tight. I turned the knob slowly. The door opened with a soft click, and the scent hit me right away. Lavender, cedar, that faint, powdery smell of old books. It was all still there, just the way I remembered it. The room was smaller than it used to feel, maybe because I had grown, or maybe because time had folded in on it. The window was cracked slightly, and the cold drifted in like a memory. Her rocking chair sat by the corner, draped with one of her knitted throws. The bedspread she loved was still neatly tucked, the cream-colored quilt she had stitched by hand years before. I felt something settle in my chest that was both heavy and calm. I walked to the dresser, slid open the top drawer, and there it was, a wooden box with a tiny brass clasp. I had not opened it since I left home at 19. The weight of it in my hands brought back flashes of the last night my mom and I had worked together in this room. She showed me how to finish them, me laughing about something small. Her voice was soft and warm, telling me to keep creating, no matter what anyone said. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the box. Inside were folded papers, worn at the corners, the original sketches of the Bloom dress. Her lines were so familiar. Sweeping curves, tiny handwritten notes in the margins about fabric weight and balance. I traced the pencil strokes with my fingertip and felt that old ache rise from the deepest part of me. I remembered the night she showed me the design. She had said it was meant to be strong but elegant, simple but unforgettable, something that could stand quietly yet still hold the whole room. Something like you, she had said. She had believed in me long before I knew how to believe in myself. A sound drifted through the room then. A low murmur from the hallway. I looked up. The voices faded again, and I closed the box gently, holding it against my chest. I stayed that way for a long moment, eyes closed, breathing through every piece of memory that threaded itself back into me. The room felt like her hands on my back, steady, gentle, the opposite of everything waiting outside that door. I finally stood and placed the box on the bed beside me. My fingers brushed the fabric of the Bloom dress I was wearing, the one the people at that dinner table laughed at, the one stitched from this very sketch. They had no idea the hours I had poured into bringing it to life, no idea the years between that girl with a pencil in her hand and the woman sitting in their spotlight tonight. The floor creaked suddenly. I turned. Michael stood halfway in the doorway. For a second, he looked as surprised to see me as I was to see him. His hand was still on the doorframe, and he lowered it slowly. He said he was looking for the restroom, but his eyes flicked to the sketch, papers on the bed. He asked if that was Mom's old stuff. His voice carried a softness he rarely let slip. I nodded, but did not invite him in. He glanced at my phone in my hand. I had not realized I was still holding it. He asked if everything was all right. I told him I had stepped away for some quiet. He said something about the dinner getting loud. He shifted his weight, studying me like he wanted to ask a different question. Maybe he remembered hearing pieces of my calls earlier in the night. Maybe he sensed something in my tone. He told me Dad had not meant to sound harsh. He always said things wrong. He said Courtney had too much champagne. He tried to explain everyone away. I looked at him for a long second. Part of me wanted to let him fill the silence. Another part of me was too tired for that. I told him we were all grown and responsible for the way we spoke to each other. He blinked as if he had not expected me to be that direct. There was another pause. A longer one. Then he cleared his throat and said he should get back. He stepped out and closed the door quietly behind him. I heard his footsteps fade down the hall. I sat back down. The quiet pressed in around me. My heart felt both steady and strange, like it was bracing for something I could not name yet. After a minute, I picked up the wooden box again. I tucked the sketch papers carefully inside and kept one small piece out, a tiny swatch pinned to a corner of the first draft. A bit of deep black silk. My mom had written a tiny note under it saying it was meant to represent resilience. I smiled at that. She had always known what I would need most. I slipped the fabric swatch into my palm and held it until it warmed. My dress brushed softly against my legs as I stood. I looked around the room one more time, letting the shadows and familiar shapes settle into me. The sounds from the dining room floated faintly down the hall. A burst of laughter, glasses touching, someone calling for more wine. It felt like another world entirely from the one I had been sitting in. I placed the wooden box back inside the dresser drawer and closed it gently. My fingers lingered on the handle before I let it go. I could feel the shift inside me more clearly now. Something had settled into place. When I stepped out into the hallway, the warmth and noise drifted toward me again. I took a slow breath. The air tasted different. Sharper, clearer. I walked past the dim row of family photos on the wall. The snapshots of birthdays and graduations were all lined up as if they belonged to a family that had been whole. I reached the end of the hall and paused. The distance between the room I had just left and the one waiting for me felt like a fault line, a thin crack that had been growing for years, finally ready to open. I smoothed the front of my dress with both hands and lifted my chin. The silk swatch was still curled in my palm. I closed my fingers around it. My mom's quiet faith settled on me like a second skin. I stepped back toward the noise, the light, and the people who still believed they knew the beginning and end of my story. The truth was already moving toward them, even if they could not feel it yet. When I walked back into the dining room, the noise hit me again like a warm wall. People had shifted in their seats. Empty plates were pushed to the side, glasses refilled. Dad stood at the head of the table, looking pleased with himself, like a captain surveying calm water. Someone announced that it was time for gifts. In my family, that part of the evening had always been a performance more than a tradition. It was a chance for everyone to show, without saying it outright, who loved who the most, and who understood what mattered. The tree in the corner glowed with white lights and ornaments my mom had collected over the years. Some of them were little paper stars I had made as a kid. I wondered if anyone else remembered that. Probably not. Dad clapped his hands together and told everyone he wanted to start. He gestured to Michael first. My brother smiled, got up with an easy confidence, and walked over to the big box he had placed near the fireplace earlier. He dragged it over to Dad with a bit of drama, milked the moment for laughs, then pulled the lid off. Inside was a dark wool coat, the kind you see in glossy magazines, all clean lines and quiet money. He slipped it over Dad's shoulders while everyone watched. People murmured in appreciation. Someone whistled softly. Dad turned this way and that, smoothing the lapels, playing shy about how expensive it must have been. Michael explained that it was a limited style from a designer in New York he had a connection with through one of his accounts. He joked that a man closing 7-figure property deals should not be showing up in off-the-rack outerwear. Everyone laughed. Dad beamed. He clapped Michael on the back and called him a solid businessman. Next was Courtney. She bounced up with a little white box wrapped in silver ribbon. She said something about wanting Dad to feel younger and sharper in the new year. Inside was a watch, sleek and minimal, the kind that did not need a logo to scream its price. She had clearly memorized the specs. She described the material, the brand, the wait list she had supposedly overcome to get it. The guests made all the right noises. Dad kissed her cheek and told her she had great taste. The air was full of praise and admiration and the faint scent of roasted ham. My stomach tightened again. I could feel my turn coming long before anyone said my name. Dad finally looked down the table at me. He did it with that same half-puzzled, half-expectant expression he had been giving me since I was old enough to notice it. Like he still could not believe I had come from him at all. He said it was my turn. All eyes shifted. I reached down and picked up the small, carefully wrapped square I had tucked by my chair earlier. Brown paper, a simple green ribbon. I had found the gift weeks ago in a bookstore in Seattle, a hardback art book my mom had loved. Her copy had fallen apart years before she died. I had written the note inside the cover, a quiet memory I thought might mean something to him if he let it. I stood and walked around the table. The room felt too bright. My palms were damp. I handed him the package and said it was something that reminded me of Mom, of him in a better time, before money and image swallowed up every conversation. He peeled the paper away with far less care than I had used in wrapping it. When he saw the book, his face did not light up the way it had for the coat. He turned it over once, then again, like he was checking for something missing. He forced out a little laugh. He said in front of everyone that it was sweet. I still thought like a teenager, that sentimental gifts were fine when you were young, but at his age, he needed things that held value. Real value, he said, gesturing to the watch and the coat. The words hung over my book like a shadow. Someone near him chuckled. Courtney leaned over to see what it was and made a small sound, the kind people make when they see something from the past they have already outgrown. She said I was always stuck in nostalgia, said it was kind of cute, if not exactly practical. Heat rushed up my neck. I swallowed it back. My fingers twitched at my sides, wanting to grab the book away, want to say that not everything had to be measured in market price. But I could feel the whole room watching, waiting, and I knew if I let my voice shake, it would be one more thing they would hold against me. I inhaled slowly through my nose. I told Dad I understood, that I had just wanted to give him a piece of something that used to make him happy. I caught Henry's eyes at the far end of the table. His expression was hard to read. There was no laughter in it at all. As I walked back to my seat, I felt the distance between us like a long cold. A hallway. My chair scraped lightly as I pulled it in. Conversation picked back up quickly, as if my failed offering had been just a brief intermission in the main show. Courtney leaned toward Madison and whispered something behind her hand. Both of them glanced at me and smiled with their lips pressed tight, the way people do when they think they are being discreet. Madison's phone appeared again, almost automatically. She seemed addicted to catching every little moment for an audience that did not live in the room. They started talking about their own gifts. Courtney listed online orders that had not arrived in time, her favorite brand collaborations of the year, pieces she was expecting from stylists in Los Angeles. She talked about dresses and shoes and bags like they were badges that proved something about who she had become. Then she steered the conversation back to the silver dress she was wearing. She told the woman across from her that it was from Ellington Atelier, that the collection had sold out in days, that she felt honored to be considered for a partnership. She made sure Henry could hear her. Henry set his fork down and asked her what she liked most about the brand. Courtney did not hesitate. She said she loved that it felt exclusive, that the clothes were not for just anyone, that you needed a certain image, a certain lifestyle, to really wear them right. I watched Henry take that in. His gaze shifted, almost lazily, in my direction. His eyes scanned my dress again, this time with more attention. I could tell he knew quality when he saw it. Fabric speaks a language not everyone hears. He made a casual comment about the founder, how she seemed committed to craftsmanship and ethics. He said it was rare to find that combination at that level in the market. There was genuine respect in his tone. Dad made a little scoffing sound. He said he respected success, but that at the end of the day, fashion was just clothing and image. He added that people like that could disappear overnight. He said what mattered were solid assets, real estate, property that stayed. Michael laughed and agreed. He looked right at Henry and reminded him how many deals they had closed together, how many projects paid off in numbers you could actually count. He clinked his glass lightly with Henry's and joked that, as long as they stuck to concrete things instead of pretty fabrics, they would both be fine. Henry did not answer right away. He looked at me instead. For a second, the whole table seemed to blur. It was just his eyes and mine. He asked me what I thought. His voice was soft, but clear enough to carry. Did I agree that fashion was only about the surface, or did I think there was more to it? I let myself breathe. I could feel a part of me wanting to retreat, to give a non-answer and keep the peace. Another part was tired, so tired, of pretending their version of reality was the only one allowed. I said I believed clothes could be armor or an apology, that they could be a shield or a spotlight, that fashion was sometimes the only language people felt safe using to tell the world who they were. I added that to dismiss all of that as surface was easy, especially for people who had never been judged by what they wore in the same way outsiders were. The room quieted a little. Not completely, just enough that I knew my words had landed somewhere unexpected. Dad made a noise low in his throat like he disapproved, but did not have a quick response handy. Courtney rolled her eyes and reached for her wine. Henry smiled slightly, a thoughtful smile, and nodded. He said he liked that way of looking at it. My phone buzzed again against my leg. I reached down, more for something to focus on than anything else. The screen lit my palm with a pale glow. Naomi's message had changed. Article confirmed. Big outlet. They want to publish the founder's story tomorrow. We can move it up to tonight if you say yes. Timing is yours. I locked the phone and slid it back into my lap, but I could not unsee the words. The conversation at the table rose and fell around me. Laughter flared. Someone made a joke about ugly sweaters. Someone else complained about flight delays. My heart had found a different rhythm entirely. Two realities were sitting side by side. The one where I was the quiet disappointment in a cheap-looking dress, and the one where my name could be on every fashion site in the country by morning. I sat there between them, feeling the space narrow. The choice about when to let those worlds collide was inching closer with every tick of the old clock on the wall. I stood there in the dining room with the noise tightening around me like a Dad's voice rising, Courtney laughing too loud, Michael tapping his fork like he wanted all attention on him. Even the clinking of glasses felt like pressure against my skin. I had reached the point where staying would only bruise me deeper, and I could feel it in the center of my chest. I pushed my chair back slowly. The legs scraped just enough to make a few heads turn. I told Dad I was going to leave early, that I had things to take care of in the morning. He stared at me like I had announced something ridiculous. He said it made sense that I would bail before the night was even done, and said I must have felt out of place sitting next to people who had accomplished something. The word embarrassment slipped from his mouth like a habit. Someone at the table chuckled. The sound felt small and sharp. Courtney glanced at my dress and smirked. She said at least she would not have to crop me out of the family pictures this year. She said the lighting would probably make my plain dress look even cheaper. Her voice carried across the table, light and amused, like she was performing for an audience bigger than the one in the room. I held my breath for a moment, let the sting pass, then let myself exhale slowly. I told Dad thank you for dinner, keeping my tone steady. Then I turned toward the hallway without waiting for permission or further commentary. The house lights softened as I moved through the familiar rooms. The living room smelled like pine and cinnamon. The family photos on the wall watched me quietly. Somewhere behind me, someone uncorked another bottle of wine, and the laughter rose again, warm and careless, as if nothing heavy had happened. Near the front door, I reached for my coat. The mirror beside it caught my reflection. The black dress skimmed the length of my body, smooth and elegant. My eyes looked older at that moment, but stronger, too. I pulled the coat around me and buttoned it with slow fingers, like sealing myself inside my own truth. I stepped outside into the cold. The air hit my face like clean water. Snow drifted sideways under the porch light, settling on my shoulders as I paused at the top of the steps. Behind me, the house glowed like a postcard, golden, and full of people who had no idea their evening was about to crack open. I walked down the steps. The crunch of snow under my boots sounded honest in a way nothing in that house had felt all night. My car sat at the edge of the driveway, coated in a thin layer of frost. I brushed snow from the window and slid inside. The silence wrapped around me immediately, solid and cool. When I started the engine, the headlights carved a path across the driveway. I took one last look at the house. Then I shifted into reverse and eased down the hill, tires gripping the slick surface as I left the place that had always made me feel smaller than I actually was. The road was quiet. Snow lined the edges like white dust. A few houses glowed faintly in the distance. It felt like I had stepped out of one world and into another, one where my breath was mine again, and the night belonged only to me. At a stop sign, I reached for my phone. A message from Grace sat at the top of the screen. She had processed my instruction and asked for confirmation. Should she proceed with the official termination of Courtney's brand request? And the trademark notice. No favoritism. No cushion. I typed back yes. My fingers did not hesitate. The next notification came from Naomi. The founder profile was queued. Jordan and the editorial team were standing by. All they needed was my approval for timing. The article could go live on the morning publishing cycle, or it could run tonight, right before midnight when traffic was strangely high. I stared at the screen, the soft glow lighting my hands. Snow drifted across the windshield, swirling like white dust caught in a beam of light. I told her to publish at 11:58. She responded almost instantly. On it. I locked the phone and set it in the cup holder. My heart thudded once, hard, in the quiet cabin. I drove the rest of the way home through empty streets. My little rental house sat dark, except for the porch light that clicked on as I pulled in. I shut off the engine and sat for a moment, listening to it cool. My breath fogged the air in faint clouds. Inside, the house felt warm in that lonely but safe way small spaces often do. I hung up my coat, turned on a single lamp, and let the silence settle. I drank a glass of water. My hands were steadier than they had been at dinner, steadier than they had been in years. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Dad. I let it ring. One missed call. A minute later, Courtney. Then Dad again. Then Michael. Their names appeared and disappeared in little flashes. Panic does not hide well behind polite voices, even in the digital world. 3 missed calls. Then 4. Then 5. I did not answer. I simply watched the screen glow and dim. Their reality was shifting, and I could feel it even from across town. A message. The headline filled my screen in bright, bold text. My name. My story. My work. The dresses. The designs. The nights I had built something from nothing. The photos from my Seattle studio. The truth. I scrolled through it slowly, letting each paragraph settle. The praise. The details. The acknowledgement of years no one in my family had ever asked me about. My phone buzzed again. 6 missed calls, then 7. I turned the device face down, letting the light flicker against the wood of my table instead of my eyes. Outside, the snow fell in soft waves. Inside, the quiet held me steady. The two worlds, mine and theirs, were separating cleanly for the first time. I sat on the couch, hands folded in my lap, feeling the weight inside me shift into something calmer. The calls kept coming, each buzz a reminder that the truth had landed in their world like a sudden drop of cold water. But it was not morning yet, and the full collapse had not reached me. Not yet. I woke up to a gray light that made my bedroom feel like it was floating. For a second, I did not remember what day it was or why my chest felt tight. Then everything rushed back. The dinner, the dress, the article, the calls I had ignored while snow tapped at my windows. My phone lay on the nightstand, black screen turned toward the ceiling. It looked innocent that way, just a small rectangle of plastic and glass. I stared at it for a long moment before reaching out. My hand hovered an inch away, as if I might get burned. When I finally pressed the button, the screen flared to life. Notifications flooded the top in a rapid stack. Messages, emails, social alerts, missed calls. The little red number next to the phone icon almost did not look real. 47 missed calls. The breath left my body in one slow exhale. I sat up, the covers sliding to my waist, and let the numbers settle in. I had known there would be fallout. I had not pictured it that clearly. I scrolled through the list. My dad's name appeared over and over, stacked like he had been pressing redial with his jaw clenched. Courtney's name sat there too, spiked between his. Then Michael's. Mixed in were numbers I did not recognize, probably friends and guests from the dinner, people who had watched the truth drop into the middle of their evening like a stone. Against my better judgment, I tapped into the voicemail box. The first message was from my dad. His voice filled the room, sharp and too loud in the morning quiet. He sounded angry at first. He demanded to know why I had never told him about Ellington Atelier. He said he had been blindsided in front of his own friends. He threw around words like disrespect and humiliation, as if I had planned the whole thing purely to injure him. The second message came a little later in the night. His tone had shifted. The edges were softer, not kind exactly, but less sharp. He said he had spent the last hour reading the article again and again. The people at the table kept sending it to him, as if he had not already seen it. He admitted he felt foolish. That was the word he used. Foolish. Like a man who discovered his own house had hidden rooms he had never bothered to open. The next voicemail was Courtney. Her voice came through high and tight, like she was trying not to scream. She said she could not believe I had put her in that position, that she had bragged all evening about working with Ellington, telling people she was practically part of the team, while I sat there in a dress from my own line and let her talk. She said her inbox was full of messages now asking why she had never shared, that she was related to the founder. She said brands had already pulled back on collaborations. It was clear, even through her anger, that she was scared. In her second message, the mask slipped a little. She mentioned an email from our legal department. I could hear the paper rustling as she read parts of it out loud, stumbling over the formal language. Unauthorized content. Misuse of imagery. No ongoing or future agreements. She said it felt like someone had taken a knife to her future and carved out the parts she had planned. I let that one end and sat there a moment, phone warm in my hand. I thought about how hard I had worked to keep personal feelings out of company decisions. The request had come in from an influencer who used my brand name without permission. We had treated it like we treated any other. The fact that she happened to be my sister did not make her behavior less unprofessional. That was the line I had drawn. This was the cost. Michael's first voicemail sounded annoyed more than anything. He said he could not believe I had sat at that table and listened to him talk business with Henry while I held that kind of leverage in my back pocket. He said any seasoned negotiator would have used that information strategically. He complained that he looked uninformed, that his credibility was on the line. His second message carried a different tone. He said Henry had called him after leaving my dad's house. The cross-promotion idea with the spirits company was not moving forward. Not because Ellington had done anything wrong, but because Henry had seen how my family treated me. He had told Michael that any brand built on ethics would think twice before tying themselves too tightly to a family that mocked its own founder to her face. There was a note of something like shame in my brother's voice when he repeated that part. There were other voicemails from numbers I did not save. A cousin asked if it was really me in the article. An aunt I had not spoken to in years saying she always knew I was special, her words dripping with retroactive support. A woman I vaguely recognized from my dad's social circle, apologizing for laughing at dinner and saying that if she had known, she would have acted differently. That last part landed like a stone in my stomach. If she had known. If any of them had known. It was always about access to the right information with these people. Never about basic decency. I stopped the playback and set the phone on the comforter beside me. The room felt too quiet after all those voices. My own breathing sounded loud. The number 47 stared at me from the corner of the screen. It did not feel like a victory. It felt like proof. Proof of how much they cared about perception. Proof of how fast they moved when their image cracked. Proof that they could find urgency when it was their reputation on the line. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and put my feet on the cold floor. The boards creaked under my weight, a small, familiar sound that grounded me. I wrapped my robe tighter and walked to the kitchen. The routine of making coffee steadied me more than any message could. Measure grounds. Fill water. Listen to the slow drip and hiss. The smell spread through the little house, warm and dark. I wrapped both hands around the mug when it was ready, letting the heat sink into my fingers. I carried my cup to the small table by the window. Outside, the snow had softened into a thin sheet of white over the street. Tire tracks marked the paths of early risers. A dog trotted by, nose to the ground, its owner trudging behind in a heavy coat. The world did not look different just because my name was online now. That felt strangely comforting. I unlocked my phone again and opened the article one more time. The headline still sat there, unbothered by the chaos it had caused in one particular house in Bend, Oregon. My photo still smiled back at me from my studio in Seattle. The story was the same as it had been last night. It was my family whose understanding of me had shifted, not the facts. I scrolled down to the comments. They had multiplied overnight. People talking about chasing dreams later in life. Women saying they were proud to see someone build quietly and on their own. A few had already begun to share my story on their own pages, adding captions about underestimation and respect. Mixed in were new posts from fashion accounts sharing Madison's earlier video from the dinner before she deleted it. The grainy clip had made its way into the hands of people who knew how to save things before they vanished. Viewers were connecting the dots on their own. The plain black dress they had mocked on camera, the luxury brand name they had bragged about, the founder's story that had gone live within the same hour. Watching it from my kitchen table, coffee mug in hand, I felt a strange mix of hurt and detachment. That woman at the table in my sister's recording looked calm, but I could see the tightness in her shoulders. I knew exactly what she had been holding back. She looked like someone who had spent years learning to survive rooms like that. That by folding in on herself. I was not that woman anymore, not completely. My phone buzzed again, a new text from my dad, short and heavier for its simplicity. He said we needed to talk privately. No guests, no audience. He asked me to call him when I was ready. There was a plea at the end. I could not remember the last time he had written that word to me. I set the phone back down and pressed my thumb along the rim of my coffee cup. Part of me wanted to answer immediately, to smooth everything over, to slide back into the role of the daughter who apologized first. Another part, the part that had grown stronger with every collection, every payroll run, every late night at the studio. A few that this was my chance to change the pattern. My mom's old words surfaced again, as if carried on the rising steam from my mug. She had told me once that some people only learned when life spoke louder than their comfort. That you could not do that work for them. You could only decide how much of yourself you were willing to sacrifice. Well, they figured it out. I took a slow breath. In, out. Felt it all the way to my belly. The number 47 was not just a count of missed calls. It was a symbol of all the years they had not called. All the times they had not checked on me when I was struggling in that tiny apartment in Seattle. Living on instant noodles and hope. All the dinners where they had let my absence slide without question because it was easier than wondering why I stayed away. Now that my name was in print and my success was undeniable, suddenly their phones worked just fine. I finished my coffee and rinsed the cup in the sink. The simple act of running water over ceramic felt cleansing. Ordinary. Back at the table, my phone waited. The screen was dark again, but the weight of it on the wood felt heavier than it should have. I picked it up and scrolled past my dad's latest message, past Courtney's long blocks of text where anger and fear tangled together, past Michael's more measured words about optics and opportunity. I went to my contacts and paused over my attorney's number instead. If my family wanted to talk, there would need to be boundaries in place, lines drawn in ink, not just emotion. My thumb hovered over the call button for a moment, then I let my hand fall to my lap. Not yet. I did not need to move that fast. I had spent a lifetime reacting. I did not owe anyone speed right now. Outside, a plow rumbled by, pushing snow to the edges of the street. The sound vibrated through the walls for a moment, then faded. Inside, the quiet settled again, but it felt different now. Less like isolation. More like a pause I had chosen. The phone sat warm in my palm. I knew I would eventually have to pick one of those names and press call. I spent relearning their own steps. I showered, dressed, made another pot of coffee, and folded the quilt on my couch just to keep my hands busy. But no matter what I did, my mind kept drifting back to the phone sitting face down on the table. The number 47. The voices in those voicemails. The tangled mix of anger, panic, embarrassment, and something else I did not want to name yet. By late morning, the sky had turned a pale, quiet blue. The snow on the street had been pushed into soft ridges along the curb. I stood by the window for a long time, mug between my hands, watching a neighbor scrape ice from his windshield with slow, determined strokes. Life had a way of moving forward even when your own felt like it was holding. its breath. My phone buzzed again. I ignored it. Then it buzzed once more, longer this time. A text. I let it sit a full minute before reaching for it. This one was from Naomi. She sent a link to a national morning show's segment. My chest tightened as I tapped it open. A bright studio. 2 hosts smiling at a screen behind them. The headline read, "Independent designer sparks national buzz with powerful founder story." My photo appeared, the same one from the article, and the hosts talked about Ellington Atelier as one of the most interesting new luxury houses in the country. They mentioned craftsmanship. They mentioned ethics. Then one of them said something that stopped my breath for half a second. There is also a circulating video from a family dinner, people laughing at a dress the founder was wearing, which turns out to have been from her own collection. A lesson in not judging books by their covers on Christmas night. I pressed pause, my finger hovering over the screen, my pulse thudding in my chest. It felt surreal hearing strangers on national television talk about me like I had become part of a story larger than anything I had known. Then my phone buzzed again, a local number this time, one I recognized from high school but had not seen in years. I let it go to voicemail. Then another message arrived, this one from a Seattle boutique that had carried my pieces early on, congratulating me and saying customers were calling already asking about them. Bloom dress. It all felt like noise around the edges of something deeper. I kept watching the snow shifting on my porch, waiting for whatever had to surface next. By noon, my stomach reminded me I had not eaten. I made a small sandwich and carried it to the table, though I barely tasted it. Halfway through chewing, I heard a soft knock at my front door. The sound startled me enough that I froze with my fork halfway to my mouth. No one ever knocked on my door without texting first. I set the fork down gently and walked to the window beside the door, lifting the curtain just enough to look out. Michael. He stood on my porch with his hands shoved in his coat pockets, shoulders hunched against the lingering cold. His car idled at the curb, exhaust rising in soft white clouds. His face looked both exhausted and determined, like he had rehearsed 10 different versions of what he wanted to say and none of them felt right. I did not open the door. I just stood there behind the curtain and watched him shift his weight. He knocked again, a little louder this time. I took a breath and cracked the door open, leaving the chain in place. The metal felt cool in my hand. He looked up quickly when he heard it. Chief crossed his face. He told me he had been calling all night and all morning. He said he knew I was angry, that I had every right to be, but he needed to talk to me in person. He said things at Dad's house were a mess and that I did not understand the situation I had created. I felt my spine straighten at those words. I opened the door enough to step outside and let it close behind me. The porch boards were cold under my socks. The air smelled like snow and pine and something metallic. Michael kept talking, words tumbling too fast. He said Dad was devastated. He said Courtney was falling apart. He said people were leaving comments on her posts asking why she had mocked her own sister. He said brands were reconsidering working with her and that her online agency had already reached out in concern. Then his voice lowered. He said that Henry had backed out of their business collaboration, that Dad had yelled at him about it, blaming him for not closing the deal sooner. He said our father was now facing financial trouble because 2 of his developments were tied to partnerships that required strong outside backing. He said the timing could not be worse. I crossed my arms, not from the cold, from grounding. He told me I needed to fix this, that I needed to make a public statement or issue a clarification, that I needed to call Dad, reassure him, do something to soften whatever narrative was forming out there. For a moment, I just stared at him. Snowflakes drifted onto his hair, melting in tiny dots. His breath formed little clouds as he spoke. I asked him quietly if he was here because he cared about me, cared about how. He said it was all one thing, that families should protect each other. He said I should have told them. I told him I had tried for years to tell them who I was, that I had dropped hints, that I had invited them to visit my studio more than once. I reminded him of the time years ago when I had asked Dad to look at my early sketches, and he had told me I needed a real plan. I reminded him of the comments, the laughter, the way they dismissed everything that did not fit their idea of success. His jaw tightened. He said that was Dad's way, that I knew that. He said Courtney never meant to hurt me, that she was just performing like she always did. I felt a slow, growing ache in my chest. Not sadness, a tired kind of realization. I told him I had spent years shrinking myself to keep peace in a family that had never asked me who I was or what I wanted. I told him the article had not created anything. It had only revealed what already existed. The cracks in their kindness, the blind spot in their love. He swallowed hard. He said they were panicking, that Dad had barely slept. Courtney's eyes were swollen from crying, that they felt foolish and embarrassed and blindsided. I looked out at the street. A truck drove by slowly, tires crunching over older snow. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Then I asked him one simple question. Would any of them have called me today if the article had never gone live? He did not answer. The silence that followed felt like a truth neither of us wanted to hold. Before he could gather himself to respond, a sharp vibration buzzed in my back pocket. I pulled out my phone. A new notification flashed across the screen. A trending article, another outlet covering the story. This one included the clip from the dinner, paired with a headline that made my breath catch. A woman mocked by her own family is revealed as the founder of a rising luxury fashion house. My thumb hovered over the screen. I could hear Michael's breath quicken beside me as he read over my shoulder. He cursed under his breath. Then he begged me again to do something, anything. Make a statement. Defend them. Correct the story. The absurdity of that request hit me in a wave so strong I had to steady myself against the porch railing. My palm pressed into the cold wood. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. He said the family name was being dragged online. He said Dad looked like a cruel man. He said Courtney looked vain and shallow. He said he looked greedy. He said it was all spiraling fast. He said I had the power to stop it. I looked at him then. Really looked. In desperation. At the frantic edge. At the realization that what he wanted was not a conversation, but control. I told him in a calm voice that I did not owe anyone a performance. I told him I needed time. Then I stepped back toward the door. He reached out like he wanted to stop me, but his hand hovered in the air and fell away. I slipped inside, closed the door gently, and leaned my back against it. My breath came out shaky but steadying. My pulse thudded in my ears. I listened to his footsteps retreat down the porch and crunch across the driveway. His engine started, then the sound faded down the street. I slid down the door until I was sitting on the floor, knees drawn close, phone in my hand. Notifications kept flashing. My world was shifting, stretching, reshaping itself. But inside the small quiet of my own house, the air felt clearer. The next decision would matter. The next conversation. The next line I chose to draw. And I knew the moment was coming. Closer with every buzz of my phone. I sat on the floor by the door a little longer than I meant to. Knees pulled up, back against the wood. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the heater and the ticking of the clock in the kitchen. My phone rested in my hand, warm and heavy, screen still glowing from the barrage of messages. The feeling that settled over me was not triumph. It was something heavier, more complicated, like waking up from a long dream and realizing you were the only one who had known it was not real. By early afternoon, the light outside had softened into that winter brightness that makes everything look a little washed out. I finally pushed myself up, stretching the stiffness from my legs, and walked to the sink to splash cold water on my face. The shock of it cleared my head. I dried my hands, went back to the table, and picked up my phone again. My dad's last text sat there, short and unfamiliar in its tone. He asked to talk privately. He had added a please. For a while, I just stared at that word. It looked strange coming from him, like a foreign language. Then, instead of thinking it to death, I opened my contacts and tapped his name. The phone rang once, twice. A part of me almost hoped he would not answer. He picked up on the third ring. His voice was rough, softer than I expected. He said my name, just that. And then he waited. I told him I had listened to some of his messages. I said I was not ready to come back to the house. If we were going to talk, it needed to be on neutral ground, where neither of us could hide behind guests or history. There was a pause. I could almost hear him swallowing his pride. He asked where. I suggested a small coffee shop off the highway, the one where my mom used to meet old friends from church. A place with chipped mugs and mismatched chairs and no chance of running into his real estate buddies. He agreed, quietly. We settled in late afternoon. Hanging up, I felt a mixture of dread and relief. The conversation was inevitable. At least now it had a time and a place. I dressed with more care than the situation deserved, pulling on a soft sweater and jeans, tying my hair back. I did not want armor exactly, but I wanted to feel like myself. I slipped on boots, grabbed my coat, and stepped out into the cold. The drive to the coffee shop took 15 minutes. The roads were clearer now, plowed and salted. The snow pushed into gray ridges along the gutters. The shop's parking lot was half full. Inside, through the big front window, I could see two older men at a corner table playing cards and a young woman working on a laptop near the back. My dad was already there. He sat alone at a small table by the window, hands wrapped around a paper cup. He looked older than he had at dinner. The overhead lights picked up the lines around his eyes and the sag of his shoulders in a way the warm glow of the house had not. When I walked in, the bell over the door chimed. He looked up quickly, relief flickering over his face before he smoothed it away. I ordered a coffee at the counter, grateful for the moment to gather myself, then walked over and sat across from him. For a few seconds, we just looked at each other. No guests, no siblings, no performance. Just the man who had raised me and the woman he had not bothered to, really. No. He started with business. That did not surprise me. He said his phone had not stopped since the article came out. Colleagues, investors, acquaintances calling to ask why he had never mentioned that his daughter was this Ellington person everyone was suddenly talking about. He said he had felt like an idiot all night. I listened. I stirred cream into my coffee, watched the swirl as it turned the dark surface lighter. He asked me why I had not told him. I almost laughed. Instead, I told him I had tried in 100 small ways for years, that he had heard the parts that fit his picture of me and tuned out the rest. I reminded him of the time I had brought early samples to the house for Christmas, and he had patted my shoulder, told me it was cute. I had a hobby. His gaze dropped to the table then. His fingers tightened around the cup. He said he remembered something different. He remembered telling me to think practically, to plan for retirement, to not count on fairy tales. That was always his language. Practical, realistic, solid. I let that sit. Then I asked if any of that had ever applied to him when he sunk money into every shiny new development, trusting his instincts more than the numbers. He flinched just a little. Then he sighed, a long breath that seemed to deflate him. He told me things were worse than he had let on. 2 of his projects were stalled. A third was over budget. He had leveraged the house more than he had admitted. He had banked on closing a deal with Henry and some of Henry's circle, a deal that was now evaporating because, as he put it, people were suddenly nervous about aligning with someone who treated his own daughter like background noise. Hearing that gave me no satisfaction. It gave me clarity. He looked at me then in a way he never had when money was on the table. He said he knew he had been hard on me at dinner, that he had said things no father should say. He said he had been drinking. He said the night had gotten away from him. I thought about my childhood, the small cuts, the jokes at my expense, the way nothing I did was ever quite enough while Michael's smallest success was celebrated. How my mom would catch my eye across a room and give me that soft look, the one that said she saw me even if he did not. I told him what he said at dinner was not a slip. It was a pattern. The same pattern that had made me feel small in that house since I was a teenager. The only difference was that this time, other people were watching. He swallowed hard. His eyes looked wet for a second before he blinked it away. He said he had grown up in a world where worth was measured by what you could put on a spreadsheet. He said he had not known what to do with a daughter who did not fit into boxes. He understood. He did not say he was sorry in a neat, clean way. The words came out tangled with justification and habit, but underneath, I could feel something that sounded like regret. He shifted then, almost visibly into another gear. He said everything that was happening online was hurting the family name, that people were making judgments based on one recording and one article. He said folks were calling him heartless, calling Courtney vain, calling Michael greedy. He said he knew the internet did not care about context, but he was asking me, as his daughter, to help him control the story. He wanted me to make a statement, to post something or give a quote saying my family supported me, that there was no bad blood, that the clip from dinner was a moment taken out of a loving whole. He wanted me to soften it all, to put a coat of gloss over rough wood. I sat back in my chair and looked at him, really looked at the man who could finally say the word foolish about himself, but still could not seem to grasp that what had hurt me was not just how he looked, but how he had been. I told him I would not lie, not to the public, and not to myself. I said I was not going to stand up and pretend that the way they treated me had always been kind, just because it was now inconvenient for people to see the truth. He pressed his lips together. His fingers tapped against the cup. He asked if I wanted them to be ruined. He asked if that was my goal. The question stunned me with how off it was. I told him I did not want anyone ruined. I wanted them to be honest. There was a difference. What they were feeling now was the discomfort of seeing themselves clearly, some of them for the first time. He did not have an answer for that. For a while we sat in silence. Customers came and went. The barista wiped down the counter. A child dropped a cookie and burst into tears. Life moved around us. Eventually, his shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen. He said he missed my mom, that if she were here, she would know what to say. She would know how to bridge this gap. He admitted she had warned him more than once that he was too hard on me, that I was made of something he did not understand, but that he needed to learn, to respect. Hearing that hurt and healed at the same time. I could almost see her sitting there, between us, hands folded around her own mug, giving us both that patient look she had when two people she loved were messing up. He finally asked if I was going to help him financially. He did not dance around it. He said if he lost the house, it would kill him, that those projects were his legacy, that without backing, he might lose everything he had worked for. I let the weight of the question hang in the air. He had never once in my adult life asked me how I paid my rent, how I kept myself afloat, whether I had health insurance or savings or a plan if things went wrong. But now that my success was visible and his footing was shaky, he was asking if I would save him. I told him I could not answer that on the spot, that if he wanted me to consider helping, he would need to have every number, every contract, every risk laid out in writing, that my attorney and my financial advisor would see them first, that I would not be the quiet family member whose name you slap onto things in. The background. The old pride flickered in his eyes at the mention of lawyers and advisors. Then it faded, fast. He nodded slowly. He said he could get me the paperwork. He said he would talk to his accountant. When we stood to leave, he hesitated, then reached out like he might hug me. His hand stopped halfway. Mine stayed at my side. The moment stretched thin. Then we both stepped back. Outside in the parking lot, the air felt sharper. I watched him walk to his car, shoulders hunched. He looked smaller than he had ever seemed at the head of that long dining room table. On the drive home, my phone buzzed with a text. Courtney's name. I did not read it right away. I needed a different kind of clarity first. Back in my kitchen, I called Grace. I told her plainly that my family might try to use my name or the company name in some scramble to stabilize their reputation or finances. I asked her to tighten every legal fence to make sure there was clear language on file that no one could represent themselves as speaking for Ellington Atelier without written consent. No exceptions. Not even family. Grace said she had already anticipated some of that. She had seen people on social media speculating about future collaborations, half of them tagging my siblings. She promised to send me updated documents by morning. After that call, I finally opened Courtney's message. It was long. Longer than I expected. The first half read like her usual panic, words spilling over each other. Lost followers. Paused campaigns. A dizzy agent telling her to lay low. Then the tone shifted. She wrote that seeing herself on that recording, lined up next to the article about me, had made her physically sick. She admitted she had always said things she thought were jokes but now heard how cruel they sounded. She wrote that she did not know who she was without people liking her photos. She said she was scared. She stopped short of apologizing cleanly, but cracks had formed in the way she had always seen herself. I did not respond. Not yet. I set the phone down and let the words breathe in the quiet room. Later that evening, another email came in. This one was forwarded from Naomi, with a subject line that made my stomach tighten. She had attached a pitch deck my brother had used in meetings with Henry and others. One slide was highlighted. It mentioned an inside track to a rising luxury fashion house via close family. Connection. Promises of access to the founder. Implied influence over brand decisions. They had used me as a bargaining chip long before the article ever came out. A card to flash in private, even as they mocked me in public. I sat there at my table, eyes fixed on that slide, the words blurring slightly. Whatever conversation came next with my family would not be about rescuing them. It would be about finally setting the price of the years they had spent, underestimating me. 2 days after Christmas, I got the message I knew was coming. It came from my dad, short and formal, asking for a family meeting. He said he wanted everyone there, that there were things we needed to address face to face. He did not use the word emergency, but it sat there between the lines. The old version of me would have gone straight to his house without thinking, ready to soothe, ready to fix. The woman sitting at my kitchen table that morning with a mug of black coffee and a legal folder at her elbow paused instead. I texted back that I would agree to a meeting on one condition. My terms would be laid out and respected. If they were not, I would leave. I told him I meant that literally. I kept it clean and simple. He replied that he understood, that everyone would listen, that they knew I held most of the cards now. That little phrase tasted bitter and true. I drove to his house in the late afternoon. The snow had dulled into gray piles along the sidewalks. Christmas lights still framed some roofs, but they looked tired now, like a party that had gone on too long. As I climbed the hill toward the house, a little knot formed in my stomach. The last time I had walked out of that doorway, my dad had just called me an embarrassment in front of his friends. Today would be different, or I would not stay. 3 cars were already parked along the curb. My dad's sedan, Michael's truck, and Courtney's compact SUV, the one she leased partly for the logo on the hood. I pulled in behind them, shut off the engine, and sat there for a moment, breathing, letting my pulse settle. The house looked the same from the outside. Warm lights in the windows, the big wreath on the front door, a little drift of snow stacked on the porch rail. Inside, everything felt different before I even crossed the threshold. Michael opened the door when I rang the bell. His eyes were shadowed, his shoulders tight. He stepped back and let me in without saying much. In the living room, Courtney sat on the edge of the sofa, hands wrapped around a mug she did not appear to be drinking from. Her usually perfect makeup was softer, her hair pulled into a plain ponytail instead of styled waves. My dad stood near the fireplace, not in his usual spot by the head of the dining room table. He looked like he had lost a few pounds in less than a week. Pride will do that to a man when it is chewing on him from the inside. I did not take off my coat. I moved to the armchair across from them and sat down, setting the leather folder in my lap. The paper felt like weight and clarity. For a moment, no one spoke. The ticking of the clock on the wall sounded loud. My dad cleared his throat first. He said he appreciated that I came. He said he knew things had been said that could not be taken back. He glanced at Courtney, then at Michael. Both of them shifted in their seats. He started to talk about the article again, about the calls he had received, the way people in his circle had acted surprised that he had kept quiet about having a daughter like me. There was a hint of accusation in the way he kept quiet, as if I had hidden myself just to make him look foolish. I held up a hand and he stopped. More out of shock than habit, I think. I told him that if we were going to do this, we were going to do it honestly. Not with his version of events, not with mine smoothed over to protect them, but with facts. Then I opened the folder. On top lay a printout of the slide from Michael's pitch deck, the one Naomi had sent me. I had highlighted the section where he implied an inside track to a rising luxury brand through close family connection. I set it on the coffee table between us, facing them. Michael went pale. He recognized it immediately. I told him flatly that I knew he had been using my name in back rooms long, before he knew what my work really was, that he had dangled me as leverage while laughing at my career over dinner. He started to stammer something about strategy, about how business was built on relationships. I did not let him finish. I told him relationships required consent. I had not given him any. Next, I laid out the printout of the email my legal team had sent to Courtney, the one about unauthorized brand usage and image rights. She looked at it as if seeing it for the first time, though I knew she had read it the night her world began wobbling. I told her that if she wanted to work in fashion, online or otherwise, she needed to understand that other people's work was not her personal backdrop. That she did not get a free pass because she had followers or because she was my sister. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then finally asked in a small voice if that meant I hated her. The question pierced me more than the anger and excuses had. I took a breath, steadying myself. I told her I did not hate her. I hated the way she had been taught to see herself, and me. I hated the casual cruelty that came so easily out of her mouth at that table. That was learned behavior. It could be unlearned, but I would not be her safety net while she figured it out. My dad watched all of this with lines etched into his forehead. When I turned to him, I could see he knew his turn was coming. I pulled out the last set of papers. These were not slides. They were copies of his own loan documents and property reports Naomi and my attorney had obtained from public records and through private channels. I had highlighted the parts showing just how deep his risks ran. I told him calmly that I knew about the second mortgage on the house, the high-interest bridge loan he had taken on a stalled development, the way he had quietly tapped into what was left of the inheritance my mother had hoped would be there for her grandchildren someday. His jaw tightened. He tried to say that everyone in his line of work juggled numbers like that this was temporary, that he had a plan. Then he stopped, seeing my face. For once, he seemed to recognize that he could not bluff me. I told them I had not called this meeting to rehash every hurt from the past. I had come to set terms, as clearly as any contract. The first term was honesty. No more using my name without permission. No more leveraging me behind closed doors. No more pretending we were closer than we were in order to impress investors, followers, or friends. The second was responsibility. I told Michael that if he wanted to climb out of the mess he had made with those deals, he would need to sit down with a real financial advisor, not just charm and spreadsheets. I told Courtney that if she wanted a career that lasted longer than a trend cycle, she needed to learn an actual skill beyond posing in borrowed clothes. The third term, the one that made my chest feel tight even as I spoke it, was about help. I told my dad I was not obligated to save him. Whatever he had assumed when he read that my company was worth more than he had guessed, he needed to understand that my success did not make his choices disappear. I said if I decided to help, it would be as a lender or investor with clearly defined boundaries, not as a daughter quietly handing over checks out of guilt. The room went very quiet after that. I could feel the weight of my words hanging there between us and the table. My dad asked in a rough voice what I wanted from them. Not in terms of money, he said, but in terms of anything else. I thought of all the years I had sat in this room feeling invisible. The nights I had driven home from dinner fighting back tears so I would not arrive at my tiny apartment already sobbing. The mornings I had gone back to my sewing machine anyway, because some part of me knew my worth did not begin or end at this address. I told them I wanted 3 things. First, I wanted each of them to stop telling the story where they were the only victim. I said we had all been shaped by the same house, the same man, the same unspoken rules. I was not the fragile one who had overreacted to a few jokes. I was the one who had left and built something anyway. Second, I wanted apologies. Not the kind that came in the middle of a crisis with 100 excuses taped to them, but real ones. Written, not texted, not tossed out in the middle of another conversation. I said they could write them to me if they wanted, but what I really wanted was for them to write them to my mother's memory, to acknowledge in ink how they had treated the daughter she had loved out loud. Third, I wanted space. Actual space. Time without phone calls and pressure, where I could decide what kind of relationship, if any, I wanted with them going forward. I said if they respected that, truly respected it, then maybe there would be a future where we could sit at a table together and not feel like we were playing the old parts we had outgrown. Michael looked like he wanted to argue with at least one of those terms. Then the fight went out of his shoulders. Courtney had tears running down her face, dark tracks cutting through faded mascara. My dad, he finally asked, his voice quiet. If I would tell them straight whether I planned to help with the house, whether he should start packing or not. I told him I would answer that in time, and a different balance of power than he was used to. I said I would not move faster just because creditors were calling, and his pride hurt. For a long stretch, we sat there with that white layered silence between us. Then I gathered the papers back into the folder and stood. They all looked up at me. 3 pairs of eyes that had never seen me clearly before that week. Now they were trying to catch up to a version of me that had existed for years without their attention. I told them I would wait for their letters. I said when I received them, I would read them once, and that what they chose to put on those pages would tell me more than any frantic phone call ever could. Then I walked to the door. No one followed me into the hallway. No one grabbed my arm or guilted me into staying for one more cup of coffee. The house felt like a set that had been struck after a show. The furniture still in place, but the illusion gone. I stepped out into the cold air and pulled the door closed behind me. The sky had started to darken, that early winter twilight settling in, making the snowbanks glow faintly. In the car, I sat with my hands on the steering wheel and my heart beating a little too. Somewhere behind me, in that big, warm living room, the people who had underestimated me were finally sitting with the full cost of it. I started the engine and eased down the hill, the tires crunching over packed snow, the road opening up ahead of me into something that looked a lot like a clean slate. The letters began arriving one by one, never together, as if each person needed their own private courage before facing me on paper. My dad's envelope came first. It was addressed in that careful handwriting he used for tax forms. A property deed, the kind that made everything look official, even when the inside was anything. But I opened it at my kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm tea beside me. His letter was written on lined legal paper, the edges torn. He started with my mother. He wrote about watching her arrange dresses at the old boutique downtown, how she used to speak softly to women who came in looking weary and left, smiling. He admitted he had never truly understood her work, that he had called it a hobby to her face and in his mind, because he believed anything not producing clear numbers was frivolous. Then he wrote about the Christmas dinner, the words he had thrown so easily across that table at me. He called them cruel. He did not hide behind excuses or blame the wine. He wrote that he had reread the article about my company several times and realized he had been small while I had been building something far larger than he ever imagined. At the bottom, he wrote that if there was any chance to rebuild what he had broken, he would try. He signed it with his name first, and then Dad, like those two roles did not always overlap. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Courtney's letter came 3 days later, tucked inside thick ivory stationery that looked too fancy for an apology. Her handwriting was messy, uneven. She wrote that she could not stand watching the video of herself mocking me. She said she felt sick reading comments from people who recognized the cruelty she had always dismissed as jokes. She said she had built her whole identity around being noticed. And now that the attention had turned against her, she saw how hollow her world had been. She admitted she had believed Dad when he said there were 2 types of daughters, the pretty one and the practical one, and that she had clung to the first because it seemed easier. She apologized for every time she took something from my closet without asking, for the digs about my clothes, for assuming she could use my work as her backdrop without permission. She said she was working part-time at a store downtown, folding sweaters and learning how to treat customers like real people. At the end, she wrote that she did love me, even if she had never been very good at it. I did not cry reading her letter, but I felt something shift quietly inside me. Michael's letter came last. His was typed, the only one that looked like a document instead of a confession. He attached a breakdown of the deals he had been juggling, the risks he had taken, and how he had used my name as leverage before he even understood my work. He called it exploitation. He said the word tasted like metal when he said it aloud. He apologized for the day he came to my house demanding that I fix the family's reputation. He wrote that he had hired a financial counselor and was volunteering at a neighborhood center teaching people how to read contracts. He said he was trying to become someone our mother would not have winced at. When I finished his letter, I set all 3 envelopes in a neat stack and rested my hand on top of them. They were heavy in a way electronic apologies could never be. The next week, I drove to Seattle to meet with my attorney and financial advisor. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Sound, gray water stretching toward the horizon. We went through my dad's documents one by one. It was worse than I expected, but not hopeless. I spent an hour looking at numbers and another hour thinking about the years behind them. In the end, I agreed to buy the house through a trust. My dad would become a tenant. The trust would own the property outright. No more borrowing against it, no more backroom deals involving my name without my knowledge. The lease spelled out everything clearly. If he wanted stability, it would be on my terms, and with full transparency. He signed the papers 2 days later in the attorney's office. He looked tired, older, but something in his shoulders eased as he set down the pen. For Courtney, I chose something smaller but honest. I called a friend at a marketing firm in Portland and asked if they needed an extra intern. Not a star, not a face of anything, just someone to sit in meetings, take notes, fill coffee orders, and learn how real strategy was made. She accepted the position without a second of her usual flair. She moved into a studio apartment with scuffed floors and sent me a photo of her new desk. It had a single lamp and a stack of blank notebooks. With Michael, my terms were long. 10 years of clean books. 10 years of making money without shortcuts. 10 years of working with clients who trusted him because he had earned it, not because he had charmed them. He wrote back that he could live with that. Spring came quietly. My studio filled with new orders after the article spread far beyond the initial audience. A museum asked to showcase 2 pieces from my winter line. A designer I respected invited me to collaborate on a limited collection. I said yes to that one. It felt like something my mother would have smiled at. People always asked about my family during interviews. Journalists danced around the topic, but it always found its way into the room. I answered truthfully, but gently. I said families are complicated, that love does not always show up the way it should, but that sometimes distance gives you a clearer view of what needs to change. By early summer, after months of space and letters and decisions, I drove back to Bend for dinner at my dad's house. The trust owned it now, but the place still smelled like cinnamon and pine. When I walked in, I found the table set simply. 4 plates, cloth napkins, no guests, no audience. Courtney stirred soup on the stove. Her hair was pulled back into a plain braid. She asked how my drive had been and did not say anything foolish afterward. Michael arrived late, smelling like a dry erase marker from teaching loan basics at the community center. My dad moved slower than he used to, but he looked lighter. He asked if I wanted iced tea or wine, and did not take offense when I asked for water. We ate together with fewer sharp edges than I remembered. At one point, my dad excused himself and returned with a small wooden box. Inside were 3 objects. My mom's old tape measure, worn soft in the middle, her brass thimble, and a sketch she had made of a dress she had never sewn. He handed the tape measure to Michael, telling him to remember that not everything could be stretched just because you wanted it to. He gave the thimble to Courtney and told her to protect herself the way there. Mother always hoped she would. Then he handed me the sketch. He said he thought she would have wanted me to have it now. I traced the lines with my thumb. The dress was graceful and simple, like something she might have worn if she had lived long enough to see me make it. After dinner, I stepped out onto the back porch. The air smelled like damp grass and fading daylight. I could hear their voices drifting through the screen door, soft ones, not the cutting kind. For the first time, standing on that porch, I felt something close to peace. Not the kind that pretends nothing happened, but the kind that grows after long nights and long truths. As I drove home that night, headlights carving a path through the quiet road, I thought about women who had written to me in the weeks since the article came out. Women who said they had been dismissed by their families, underestimated, silenced, laughed at. Women who kept building anyway. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.